Light snow is falling in the nation's capital this morning on this day of somber reflection and eternal gratitude. Final preparations are underway to honor the brave men and women who fought for this country. Thousands are gathering here in memory of those who served Canada on battlefields overseas and did not return. Good morning and welcome to CTV News coverage of Remembrance Day 2013. Here in Ottawa, I'm Lisa Laflamme, and over the next 90 minutes, we'll bring you the ceremony at the National War Memorial. The cenotaph, just steps from Parliament Hill, was originally unveiled in 1939 to pay tribute to Canadian troops who did more than their share in the First World War and has become a permanent tribute to the courage of Canada's military and a reminder of the risks they continue to face. We will hear from veterans and their families today, along with the three special guests alongside of me. Retired General Rick Hillier, who commanded the NATO mission in Afghanistan and held the Canadian Force's highest rank, Chief of Defence Staff. Award-winning Canadian author Jane Urquhart has written works inspired by the devastating effects of war. We're thrilled to have Jane with us as well this morning. And of course, CTV Chief Political Correspondent Craig Oliver. No special broadcast is complete without you, Craig, but I want to start with the General and put us in the mind of the soldier on this Remembrance Day.
Lisa, emotional. You know, you're a soldier, sailor, airman or airwoman or a Special Forces trooper for Canada. Most likely you've been on operations and in combat yourself, and here you are now participating in a national day of remembrance and commemoration and appreciation. And so not only are you thinking about yourself and what you've done in your life to serve Canada, the battle buddies that perhaps you've lost, those who've come before us, Korea, World War II, World War I, the Boer War. It's an emotional day for every single man and woman in uniform, and I would say equally for their families. Emotional.
And Jane, you know, the theme of war has been threaded through so much of your work. No oral historians left from World War I. How much of a challenge is that for you as a writer?
Well, I would say that in a way there really are some oral historians left, in the sense that we have people who remember stories that were told to them and who will continue to tell the stories to other people. This kind of oral tradition has gone on since the Iliad and the Odyssey, and long before that, especially in relation to war. But we should also remember that we have an archive, and we have many archives. We have, of course, the National Archive here in Ottawa, but in the archives, enormous numbers of stories are told.
And Craig, this is 60 years since the first Remembrance Day. I don't know if you were covering it then, but you were certainly at it. Give us your sense of what has changed over these 60 years on a day like today.
I attended my first ceremony 60 years ago as a young naval reservist. Since then, these ceremonies had changed but little until the war in Afghanistan, and that redefined everything for two reasons, I think. First, Afghanistan was the first war in which we brought home our dead, and those coming home ceremonies became so emotional and evocative. The ramp ceremony, and then the Highway of Heroes. And the other element, I think, that has changed everything is the fact that it's the first televised war we've ever had, so that reporters like you and others from our colleagues in other networks were showing the face of war in people's living rooms. And each time a soldier was killed or any other service was killed, we covered them in a very personal sense. We did separate stories in each of them, and we personalized those losses in a way we had never really done before. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing these immense crowds. People have begun to appreciate the self-sacrifice in a way which maybe they quite couldn't have done before.
It's always been such a privilege to be able to cover the troops that way, the repatriation ceremonies, and certainly a Remembrance Day ceremony. Ottawa Bureau Chief Robert Fife is out there in that snowstorm, what looks a bit like a snowstorm, Bob, at the cenotaph. Give us the view from your position. I see those vets with their blankets around their shoulders trying to stay warm.
Yeah, Lisa, just before the ceremony got underway, the clouds opened up and the snowflakes started coming down. It's actually quite a beautiful day. Among the dignitaries that are going to be here will be the Governor General, the Prime Minister, the Veterans Affairs Minister, the Chief of the Defence Staff, the RCMP Commissioner, of course, dignitaries and diplomats. But what really pulls at your heartstrings are the veterans themselves, particularly the Second World War veterans, my father's generation, many of them showing up in wheelchairs and in walkers, bundled up, but here to remember the sacrifice of their fellow people who fought in the Second World War and lost their lives. And of course, what you now see the new generation, particularly the Korean War generation, which are in their 80s now, very few of them left, and then and as Craig mentioned, the Afghan generation here as well.
And they never forget their commands. We can see them out there in preparation for this ceremony to get underway. On the other side of the cenotaph, CTV's Mercedes Stevenson has a good view also of the veterans who've started arriving. Mercedes.
Absolutely, Lisa. We've seen veterans from World War II, Korea, peacekeeping missions, and young veterans from Afghanistan. I'm also looking out into the crowd, and what a variety of people have come out. As I look out, I can tell you the crowd is as far as the eye can see. Small children on their parents' shoulders in the middle of the snowstorm, as well as military personnel wearing their full medals. They are here in uniform to remember their brothers and sisters who did not come home.
Now we are seeing the national Remembrance Day ceremony, but certainly Canadians all across this country are taking part in memorial services for Remembrance Day. In Halifax, there are two ceremonies, one specifically for the Navy and the other for all branches of the military, held at the historic cenotaph right in the heart of the city, which of course is where we find Athletic Bureau Chief Todd Battis. Todd.
Good morning, Lisa. Yes, and of course we're well into our ceremony here, given the hour time difference we're ahead in Atlantic. And I'm struck as well here by the number of small children and families that have come out. It seems that this ceremony here at Grand Parade in Halifax only gets bigger every year, and the fact that the weather cooperated today didn't hurt us either.
Mm-hmm. We got all the snow in Ottawa, Todd, so enjoy the warmth there in Halifax. Next year, of course, will mark the 100th anniversary of when the First World War began. But the reason we set aside this day to remember is because of when the hostilities ended, November 11th, 1918. Canada emerged from the shadow of the Great War with the pride of a nation.
More than 600,000 Canadians signed up for active duty out of a population of just 8 million. Canadian soldiers fought as a distinct unit under Canadian command for the first time in battles like Vimy Ridge, Passchendaele, and the Battle of the Somme. The Canadians quickly made a name for themselves, with the British Prime Minister noting the Germans prepared for the worst whenever they came up against Canadian troops. But the human cost was incredibly high. Nearly 1 in 10 did not make it home. After 4 long years of fighting, more than 66,000 were killed, 172,000 injured.
Stunning numbers. The stories of that war are now only told by historians or passed down through family members or people like Jane Urquhart. Jane, I'm fascinated to hear that when you first started exploring this. Let's talk about the Vimy Monument, the first time you went there.
I went there for the first time with my husband, who was a great admirer of Walter Allward, the sculptor who created the monument, and we were shocked. Horrified, actually. There were very few Canadian visitors. The monument itself was not in good repair. But we were also very moved by the way the French were responding to the monument. In the guest books, for example, you'd see merci, merci, merci all the way down. And of course, the French were responding not just to the First World War, but also to Canada's role in the Second World War. So it has been wonderful to see the monument be restored. Wonderful.
And General Hillier, for the 100th anniversary, of course, 2014, there's serious efforts underway for Canada to install even more of an educational base at Vimy?
Lisa, there are, and I happen to be the patron of the Vimy Foundation, and what we aim to do is put an education center right at the Vimy Memorial itself. It's going to cost a significant amount of dollars, so we're encouraging Canadians to give a Vimy for Vimy. So the new $20 bill to Vimy, give a Vimy for Vimy, and we want to build an education center to help remember, to help commemorate, and most importantly to educate and to assist what Jane has talked about in our next generations coming through, understanding from where they've come. And you can't do that unless you work at it.
And a bit more time on that, because Vimy, of course, was 1917, not exactly 1914. The world had never seen a conflict like the Great War, and a lot of people hoped it never would again. But a few decades later, as the 30s drew to a close, another confrontation, one that stretched beyond Europe, would drag countries all over the globe, including Canada, back into battle.
The Second World War lasted 6 brutal years. The fight pitted allies of freedom against tyranny and oppression. New weapons allowed for battle on land, in air, and at sea. 1 million Canadians enlisted, fighting in the Battle of the Atlantic, the raid on Dieppe, and on D-Day at the beaches of Normandy. Women served alongside the men for the first time, volunteering in huge numbers, active in the war effort and in keeping the economy churning back home. More than 45,000 Canadians were killed, 55,000 wounded, as another generation left a legacy of courage and determination.
By the time the war ended, Canada was a significant military power with a population of only 11 million people, but the 4th largest air force and the 3rd largest Navy fleet in the world. Craig, it is staggering, though, to look at the numbers of dead in the First and Second World War and to see these vets out here today. Your sense of when the troops came back after the Second World War, how they integrated back into society?
Well, it was a reaction, really, from what happened after the First War, when they came back, and remember, they enlisted in incredible numbers in terms of per capita servicemen, but they came back, they got off the trains, and they went back to their farms, and that was pretty much it. And the government was determined not to make that mistake again, and after the Second World War, they had political power vets. You just said there were 1 million of them. They were not isolated. They had each other. Everybody went to legions to drink and to exchange, to heal in many ways too. But the government poured resources out for them. First, they built hospitals for them. They gave them their university education. They did a massive national housing program that gave them reasonable priced housing. And so you wonder why we don't seem to be able to do enough, according to many vets, for the people who've come home from Afghanistan, and particularly for those who've come home badly wounded in mind and body, when we did so much for the Second War vets. And I think it's partly because we don't have as many. They don't loom in the population as large, those who fought in Afghanistan.
And we don't want to get too political, but Jane, I know you've explored the whole PTSD concept of troops coming back then and compare it to now.
Yes, I think that you can look at it from 2 points of view. First of all, there was the term post-traumatic stress syndrome didn't exist, obviously, at the time of the return of the First World War vets. It was called battle shock.
Or shell shock, I guess.
Or shell shock, yes, exactly. And they were treated as psychiatric patients with the kind of stigma that was attached to that notion in those days. And so it was very, very difficult for World War I vets, I believe, when they first came home. As Second World War, some people really moved forward after that war because they were able, as was just said, to go to university and become educated in ways they never would have been able to before. But that changed the whole texture of Canadian life, really, because it moved a lot of people out of a rural environment who would have remained there had the war not existed. And we saw a great movement toward the cities after the Second World War.
General Hillier, then, but let's bring it up to today, then, and the frustrations you hear.
At least I do hear a lot of frustrations, and in those frustrations we should never lose sight of the fact there are many awesome programs out there and benefits for our veterans who come out of Afghanistan or other conflicts around the globe and give them much of what they need. But the one thing that is falling short here, I think, is the Veterans Charter. that needs to be rewritten completely because it does not look after our veterans, particularly over a longer period of time. I mean, $250,000 as a lump sum may seem a lot right now, but a 22-year-old soldier who has lost both his legs and suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder is still going to be without his legs 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now, still suffering somewhat from PTSD, and they're going to need support all during that time, and the Veterans Charter does not do it.
And
renew that charter.
We're going to talk to the minister later in the broadcast, but of course it's so clear by what you've all said. Every Canadian veteran has a story to tell, and we have a few extraordinary personal accounts to share with you this morning. The first comes from Bill Payton, who is now 95 years old. He was a flight lieutenant in the Second World War. Payton was captured by German forces and taken to an infamous prison where he had a first-hand account of an event we now refer to as the Great Escape.
My name is Bill Payton. I was in the Royal Canadian Air Force as a navigator, and I did 7 trips over Germany. I was shot down in 1942 at Stuttgart and was taken a prisoner. There was a bunch of people around us, and they were throwing stones at us. I was taken to Stalag Luft 3, which was the camp from which the Great Escape arose. I had nothing to do with the escape, but I was what they call a penguin. I was a lookout to walk around the compound to make sure that when the work was being done on the tunnel, that there was no Germans in the vicinity, that they could hear the men working. The escape happened. We were able to get many out through the tunnel. Unfortunately, a lot of them were shot. They said they were shot trying to escape. I was there 2 years. We were rationed. We didn't get much food. And at the time I came out, I guess I weighed about 115, 116 pounds. We were liberated by the 13th Cheshire Regiment, which was a tank corps. As the fellows went by, they threw us food, their food, because we hadn't had anything to eat for a while, and they give us all their food. Until finally we got back to the main area, and they flew us back to England.
76 Allied airmen took part in the Great Escape. All but 3 were eventually recaptured, and most of them were executed. CTV's Mercedes Stevenson is at the cenotaph right now with an advocate for Canadian veterans, which is just what we've been talking about. Mercedes, tell us about your guest.
That's right, Lisa. I'm here with Mike Blay, who is the president of Canadian Veterans Advocacy. Mike, you're here representing veterans today. What does this day mean to you?
Oh, I think this is a very solemn and respectful day. You know, with the Afghanistan war, many of us who served in the peacekeeping, it's been brought home. Many of our brothers and sisters served over in Afghanistan and have paid the ultimate price. So this year it's very special. I think that a majority of veterans are standing proud today, you know, and thinking about those that we have who have paid the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of our nation.
When you look out at this crowd and you see young children, service people, the Prime Minister arriving right now as we speak, how does that feel emotionally, all of these people recognizing the service of Canada's veterans?
Oh, it's very, very poignant for me. You know, I'm from Niagara Falls. This is coming to the big city kind of a thing. And, you know, to come to the National Memorial on such a special day with the Prime Minister present, you know, and well, you know, what got me the most on the way here, I must have been stopped by half a dozen people that came up and said, thank you for your service. And I would encourage everyone to do that today. You know, I mean, those who serve and those who have served, that's a very important thing when Canadians come up and tell you thank you for your service. And we're grateful.
Mike, we're grateful for the interview and for your service. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. Blessed remembrance.
Thank you, Mercedes. And there again is the Prime Minister and Mrs. Harper arriving at the cenotaph. In front of the memorial, they will be met by the Dominion President and Dominion Secretary. Bob, this is always a powerful moment for this, you know, so many people stream into this city for today, but to be there in the midst of the dignitaries and the Prime Minister and all of the vets, it's a powerful moment.
It really is. I remember as a young boy going to Remembrance Day ceremonies in my town, and at that particular time it was the First World War and Second World War veterans and Korean War veterans, and it always was an emotional moment for me, and it remains so today as I look out there and I see those older veterans, but also the Aboriginal veterans. You know, we forget from the communities across this country, from Native reserves, the number of young men in Native reserves that go into the military and find a life for themselves and sacrifice for our country. And you see them here with their medals and some with Native headbands on. And you know, it really is a very emotional moment when you see these kind of, when you see the look on their faces, you know in their own hearts that this has meant so much to them.
Thank you, Bob. And arriving right now, this is Mrs. Nikki Saharis. It was her son, Sergeant Chris Karagiganis, who was killed, a roadside bomb in June 2007. Such a powerful story she has to tell, and such a bittersweet moment. This is actually an honor, General Hillier, I think you'd agree, no mother would want, because certainly it indicates you lost a son or daughter in the conflict.
Lisa, I think she's wishing she could be any other place in the world under any other set of circumstances, but she is here, and therefore she is honored to represent all of those mothers who have lost sons and daughters throughout the years, and certainly most recently those in Afghanistan. I can't help but imagine how emotional it must be for her.
I had an opportunity to meet with her last night, and we're going to show you that interview coming up. But it's just, she said, you know, tomorrow I'll meet the Prime Minister for the first time. And I think what really strikes you is the pride she feels for representing all of these mothers, Jane.
Yes, absolutely. I read this morning a little cutting from a letter home from the First World War that said, it was from a son to his mother, said, if I'm missing, don't wait for me. You know, don't put yourself through any more misery than you have to. And I thought, how moving this is coming from, you know, a very young person and a person who cares about the emotional state of their mother and father. I thought it was really something.
I think that's what struck me about the way Sergeant Karagiganis really almost trained his own mother to prepare, to be strong for any possible situation, which of course happened. Craig, I think that's always, for families back home, the toughest is just that not knowing.
I think one of the things many of us forget about the vets returning and vets who don't return is that this is also about families, not just about the people who wore the uniform themselves. And families are badly hurt, badly destabilized by war. And so we have to deal with them also. They need healing. It's complex, very difficult business dealing with the troops who've come back and then their families.
And Afghanistan was Canada's biggest overseas military mission since Korea, and the chain of events that eventually led to the war on terror started in the United States with 4 hijacked planes.
In the aftermath of September 11th, Canada quickly joined the NATO-led coalition. The goal, dismantle al-Qaeda, topple the Taliban, and establish democracy in Afghanistan. The initial deployment was done in secret, but the number of Canadian boots on the ground eventually swelled to more than 2,500. With crude weapons like roadside explosives and suicide bombers used to target Canadian troops, this was a war where the enemy wasn't always obvious. Since 2002, 158 Canadian soldiers and 4 civilians have been killed in Afghanistan, the number of wounded in the thousands, but the government no longer releases the exact figure.
And the Governor General just arriving at the National War Memorial wearing the Royal Canadian Navy uniform this year, General. This is his one chance at...
Lisa, perfectly apt for the weather at the War Memorial. He may be floating by the time this is all over. I'm delighted to see it. The Navy doesn't get enough recognition.
And the Prime Minister moving into position also. Again, the Governor General just had met the Silver Cross Mother, one of the most prestigious honors of this Remembrance Day. Every year, a military mother is chosen to represent all of the mothers of Canadian soldiers killed in action. Again, it's Nikki Saharis this year from Quebec. She raised her 3 sons as a single mother after her husband died of cancer in 1990, but her greatest heartache was the death of her youngest son. Sergeant Chris Karagiganis was known as a leader and a top-tier parachutist. He died in Afghanistan again in June 2007 with 2 other Canadian troops when an IED hit their vehicle. I sat down with Nikki at the Canadian War Museum last night, and she and Chris's father came to this country in 1968, and for their adopted country of Canada, her son fought and died. And it was the pain of loss. It's profound when you talk to her, but for this mother, it is really nothing but pride.
I will thank all of them, for all of them, the mothers, because I know how they feel. We share the same pain. And I'm going to thank for all of them. And also I'm going to thank for all the guys who have lost their lives, including, of course, my son first.
Mm-hmm. I want to know more about Chris. When he first decided the military was the way he wanted to spend his life.
Well, he went to Air Cadets from when he was 14, and when he finished about 18, 19, something like that, he found out that he couldn't fly a plane because from his eyesight it wasn't perfect, so he was disappointed. After he tells me, this is what I want to do, and this is going to make me happy.
And tell me about then when he first went to Afghanistan.
Well, when he told me, I said, what can I say? What can I say? You say, yes, Chris, go, and I'm supporting you. Okay, but he came to Greece at that year at Christmas. We had a great time together. So when he went to Afghanistan, I remember one of the almost last calls. He told me that now things here are it's much better, and I am proud because I am here and helping people to have a better life, and also the children to have schools. Once I remember he told me, it's nothing ever going to happen to me, but it's one of the millions, I remember exactly the words, ever happened something to me. Don't forget everything I told you. And that day I remember I said, okay, Chris, don't bother to tell me this again because I have it in my mind like a tape. Okay, and that day he said to me, Ma, in case anything happened to me, don't forget the tape. I want you to be strong, proud, and to believe that this is what I wanted to do. I bet maybe a month after, I don't know, I don't remember, I hear about an accident.
And that day when you got a knock on the front door?
Not exactly, I was in Greece.
Oh, yeah.
I had a bad feeling. I get up on the bed and I say, something wrong, something wrong, something wrong. And then I found myself with tears. I said, what's happening to me? I hear the phone and I hear my son's voice, like he couldn't talk to me. He says, Ma, the way he said it, I said, something wrong? He says, yeah. I said, anybody got hurt? Maybe Chris? And he said to me, not only, more worse. And then that minute I felt the earth turns upside down. I said, oh, this is it, I'm finished. But something happened inside me, I don't know for how long after, and I felt so strong.
Does it get easier by doing things like touring children, talking to school children?
Of course, everything I do, it's for him. It gives me like a strength to go, and I'll be proud of myself to doing it for him. But as a pain, I can tell it's the same thing. That minute I felt I have a fire in my stomach. That fire still is there.